Let's Talk About Pain, a podcast from the Quebec Pain Research Network. In each episode, we discuss the latest advances in pain research with guests from across Quebec in the health and research communities. Enjoy your listening.
Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About Pain, created in collaboration with the Quebec Pain Research Network. My name is Hannah Derue, and I'm a PhD student at McGill University under the supervision of Dr. Alfredo Ribeiro-da-Silva and Dr. Jeffrey Mogil. Today we are joined by Lesley Singer, a patient partner who has kindly offered to share her insights and experience living with a chronic pain condition. We'll talk about her story and how chronic pain has made an impact in her life. Hi Lesley, thanks for joining us today. As a researcher, I'm in a lab environment all day long, separated from the people that I actually want to make an influence on with my research. And by having you on this podcast, I would really like to bridge the gap between researchers and people who live with chronic pain. So thank you for joining us. And I'd like to just jump right into it by asking you to introduce yourself and tell the audience a bit about who you are.
Okay, so thank you for having me, first of all. And my name is Lesley Singer. I'm better known as Mom, Nana. I teach chronic pain management to clinicians in the Certificate for Chronic Pain Management. I am a physiotherapist, and I like to say I dab in research.
Okay, I will be asking you about that research. So let's jump into the main topic of discussion today, which is your chronic pain diagnosis and how it shaped your story. Could you tell me a bit about that?
Okay, I was newly graduated. I went back to school as a mature student and became a physio and was working for 8 years when I was diagnosed with a brainstem meningioma. And so this took me out of the workforce, and I had major surgery. And although I got back in 6 months, a year after that, I developed this terrible pain in my face, which ended up being diagnosed as trigeminal neuralgia. And little did I know that was the start of my life with chronic pain.
How old were you when this happened?
I was 50 when I developed the chronic pain.
Okay. Wow. So this podcast is open to the general public, but people with lived experience with chronic pain are often a population that we as researchers want to connect with a lot. So could you describe some of the chronic pain management strategies that were given to you after you received this diagnosis?
In the beginning, it was just pain management, get me through day to day. And so pharmacology was a mainstay of my armamentarium against my chronic pain or with my chronic pain. So I started off with medication. I was very, very fortunate to have been taken into the chronic pain management unit at the Allen Edwards. And so I had a multidisciplinary team. I worked mostly with the psychologist and with the doctor. And so in the beginning, it was breathing exercises, it was medication, it was mindfulness, it was just get from day to day in the beginning. And I did learn strategies after that. It was a long journey. And so probably if you asked me anything, I'd say I tried that. So, yeah, I had a great big toolbox, and I guess the biggest thing was the medication in the beginning and the psychology.
Okay. If you could explain a little bit more about your history with the medication. In particular, my field of research is in opioids and chronic pain and how those two things sort of interplay. And from my understanding, you have a bit of experience with opioids. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. When I began with medication, I was on pregabalin or Lyrica at the time, I believe, in an antidepressant, which was the one of the steps in the WHO ladder of analgesia. And after I had those, it didn't seem to do it for me. I was in intense pain. I had shooting pain in my face. It was there constantly. If I moved my face, if I smiled, if I did anything, it was just there. So it almost wasn't compatible with life. And so the next step was opioids. And so I wanted anything that could help me stay at work. And so I started the first opioid that started short acting, and I took it when I needed. I was monitored, as I say, at the pain unit, and so it was easy to always see that I was being able to function with them, that I was being monitored per se. And so I started with short acting. I went to long acting. I started with 1. I went to 2. I didn't do that well, had a slump. I ended up on 3. That was my max. I had 3. I had short acting, I had long acting, I had a patch, I had all kinds of opioids, I guess, because we would increase the dose and then we would say, okay, we don't want to increase the dose anymore. Let's go for a change of opioid and see if we can do that and maintain the same dose. So we did that. I always worked with the doctor. And that was my life on opioids. And unfortunately, everything was so fatiguing. I just fell asleep driving. So that was just like, okay, what do we do now? Because I need to work. And so let's add Ritalin to the mix and keep you awake. And so I did that. I worked when I could. My work was very accommodating for me, I must say. And I lived a life on opioids, really.
Wow.
What did they do for me? I would say they kept me working, they kept me functioning, they kept me hopeful. They gave me what I was looking for, to be able to. I lived week to week. When I left my appointment at the pain center, I looked forward to my next one. So, I think it's a blur, a lot of it, but they got me through it. And I'm glad they were there at the time.
So just before the interview, for context for people listening, Lesley and I had a conversation about the duration of time that you spent on opioids. It was from 2002 to 2015. Am I right?
Yeah. By the time I came off my last one, yes.
That's a long time.
Yeah. It is a long time, and I'm happy to say that doesn't exist as much today as it did back then, and that's probably a good thing. But it got me through that period of time, and I did function. Eventually I did, and I started to find, with other strategies, to find who I really was and give me the strength to be able to say, okay, let's give it a go. I'm getting older. I've been on them a long time. Let's see what it's like without. And so it gave me the hope, the strength to be able to do that and be at a point where it wasn't someone saying to me, I don't think you should be on opioids. Like, we just don't do that. So it was me saying, I think it's time. And that's what was so great about it. And I was still on 3, so I had to come off slowly. I had to, it was an up and down kind of battle. So yes, it was a long time.
It's not a linear process moving for most people. Was that your experience as well?
Definitely. When I speak to people today who are in the process of going off or who have come off, they had all sorts of really awful things happen to them, like sweats and the anxiety and the shakes and I was really lucky I didn't have any of that.
Really?
But I really believe I didn't have any of that because I had that person behind me to say, well, if you do, you do this. Let's do some breathing. Let's do some. And so I didn't have it, but I was confident coming off them.
Wow. Okay. So how much of a role do you think that your mental state, when you decided, you made that decision that you were going to get off of opioids, how much of a role do you think your confidence and your, I'm going to do this attitude played in how successful you were?
I think that was a great part of it, because it's you deciding you want to come off it, and it's you who has the determination to push through it, and it's you who has that support saying, yeah, I think this is a good idea. So it's all kind of coming from yourself. And so I think when someone thinks, should I come off opioids? Maybe I should come off opioids. There's always that hesitation. And then when you have something happen, you say, oh, maybe I shouldn't. Whereas for me, it was this like, okay, if I have this, what are we going to do about it? But I want to come off them.
Okay.
And each time I'd come off a little bit, I'd say, wow, I didn't realize cognitively I was so affected.
Really? Okay. So as you went along, it was reinforcing that you were having like maybe like more mental clarity, like some of the side effects of the opioids were decreasing, and that was rewarding?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Other than that, would you say that you mentioned that the team played a huge role, and we're social creatures as people. How much do you think your family and your community played a role in decreasing your dose of opioids while living in chronic pain?
That's funny. Family, they didn't play a role at all.
Okay.
Because I never discussed my pain at home. I never discussed it with my kids. I never discussed it with my husband at the time. It was purely my decision. I think community, at work, people supported it. The pain center was my community, and they supported it. And so I think that was a big part of it. I think education was a huge part of it. And I think it was the time it was in the world where we knew more about opioids. And so it was not the main kind of pharmaceutical management anymore. And so a lot of things played a role in it. But strangely enough, not family, which it does in many cases, not particularly in mine.
Okay. You had a support network nonetheless, though, with
I
your
did.
clinicians. And
Yes.
I think you shared with me before we started this interview, a good therapeutic alliance goes a long way with your clinician.
Yeah, and I was very embedded in the pain world at the time. And so I had other people who lived with pain. I had, I think that played a big role in that I was already embedded in the pain community.
Okay.
And so they were my community, and they were my support.
You mentioned that you had these periods during the time you came off of opioids where you hit a road bump or something didn't go to plan. Could you tell me a little bit about those experiences and how you managed to pull through?
I think for me, where I had a bump would be of depression. And so I would go through a slump where I was more depressed, and then I would wonder, is it just coming off the opioids? Is it a side effect? And then I would, rather than go back up on the opioids, I would avoid decreasing them at that time and just stay stable. And, sometimes it would be a call into the doctor or talking with someone like that. I did a lot of reflection, and I think that was good for me, to reflect on what my goals were. And also at the time, I have to say, I had something new in pain management. I had a motor cortex stimulator implanted in my brain. And so for me, that was always, I had that now, so I didn't need opioids as much. And so I was able to turn this up, turn this down. And so if I found that I was having a bit of a slump, okay, stay firm on the dose, but up my stimulator and see how that worked. So having multimodal, I guess, management was a huge help for me coming off the opioids, for sure.
Okay, so a huge part of this is not only having a good connection with other people and feeling a support base of some kind, but also experiencing it from multiple angles. Lots of specialties are involved, different approaches. I mean, we talked a little bit again before we started the recording. We were having a wonderful discussion about this. I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about your view on interdisciplinary pain management and how that played a role for you.
Interdisciplinary management is so important because you get things from different angles from them as well. And so my psychologist worked at the pain center, but when I saw her outside the pain center, but she was still able to work with my doctor. So they had conversations. We had conversations together. I had my own physiotherapy background, so that played a role in it. I never saw a physio per se during that time. It was facial pain, and so I didn't see the need for it. But, we got the dentist involved who was at the pain center. We saw, we got someone else who did injections to see. It was so interdisciplinary, and what do you think? This is what we've tried. So I think it plays a huge role because you see things from different angles just as they do. And so if you're just working with one discipline, they kind of do what they're taught, what they know, what they're good at. But maybe that isn't what works for you. And so interdisciplinary to me is the only way to go.
Okay. I guess shifting gears into more the research side of things, I wanted to know from my own perspective as like a chronic pain researcher, and now learning that you've done some research of your own, I suppose this is a two-part question. You wear multiple hats, one being as someone with lived experience and one being a researcher yourself. What do you think the pain research community needs to know about living with chronic pain?
I think they need to know that they need to work with a person who lives with pain because it shows them the relevance of their research and what it can do for someone who lives with pain. I think they need to realize that each pain case is unique, and that as much as they might know or work in a specific area that has chronic pain as a symptom or as part of it, they haven't met, maybe they haven't met different people who have chronic pain and how it manifests in a different way. And so I think the researcher needs to know, meet as many people as you can who have chronic pain, who live with chronic pain, and it will come back in your research. It will help you. It will help you understand how it can help them better. And so I think they need to understand we need to work together.
I love this answer, and I'm going to go further into it because I think that this is so important, especially from my perspective. I work with mice as a model animal of chronic pain often, and I know a lot of people who do the same. Could you tell me a little bit about why you think, if you do think, that these people especially, or in particular, should reach out to people?
It's so funny leading. That you ask that. No, it's very it's very timely that you ask that. I worked with my very first research project that I worked with as a patient partner was in a basic science, with mice.
Tell us about your study.
It wasn't my study. I was the patient partner involved. And I thought, how am I going to work with someone who works with mice? Like, what are they going to have in common with me?
Right.
But I met him. He told me about his research he was doing with mice, and he was doing circadian rhythm with mice.
Okay.
And so he started talking about the mice and their chronic pain. And I said to him, wow, it's just like mine. I have two different kinds of pain. One goes up as the day goes, one goes down as the day goes. And he said, oh, that's fascinating. We started to talk. Now we always work together. I've been working with him for 10 years.
Wow.
And he decided to take his research to people from mice, even though he still is in a basic research team. We do that. And so he always I didn't know how much I had given to him, but he always talks about it when he's speaking at a conference or somewhere, how much he gained from just talking to me. We were just, hey, what do you do? What do you do? How's your pain? And that's how we work together. And he's in basic research. He works with mice.
Wow. So there we go. For those of you who work on mice and think that this has nothing to do with what you're doing, maybe you should ask someone, because maybe it'll be your next big eureka moment.
It was mine.
I guess it was this guy's as well. Okay, so I wanted to say too, as much as researchers and clinicians who work with patients really would like to make a change in the lives of people who are living with chronic pain, we really have not got to the bottom of how to address chronic pain or how to manage it in a way that is ideal for most people. We've had chronic pain has been diagnosed for years and years and years. But I want to know what your vision of the future is. Where are we going with this? What can we do better?
I think what we can do better is realize how much social is involved with pain management. And I think we've been working a lot on the psychological, we've been working a lot on the biological, the physiological, but we haven't worked a lot on the social. And ask anyone who lives well with pain, and they will tell you that this person, this group, this self-help team, there's something social in there. And I think we haven't tapped into that yet. And social can be your community. Social can be your friends. Social can be your family. Social has many places that we haven't looked. And in fact, most teams don't even have a social worker on them. And so I think that's the future of pain management, is looking to how much social can play into helping. And that way we can use communities, we can use pain management teams, we can use family, we can use friends, we can use mentors, we can get together and look at the social, we can tap into that. And I think that is one of the big keys for the future.
So in other words, the future is interconnected in many ways for people living with chronic pain. Okay.
That's a great way to say it.
I like that. And I think that goes for researchers, clinicians, and people with lived experience. We all need to be talking to each other within our communities and also between each three of these groups, because they're often so segregated.
Yes. And they still are. Yeah. They still are today. And one of the things I find is when we look to pain management, we see that in Alberta they do this, in Quebec they do this, in Ontario they do this. But why are we repeating what they do? Why are we doing that in Quebec too? Why don't we talk about how Canada can do it? And what works in BC? Let's do that. Rather than let's compete against them and see who can do it better.
Right.
I think we spend a lot of resources in that. And I wish we could all work as a country to get together and do it right.
This leads perfectly into my next question. There is so much money involved in research, and there is so much money for the people who have chronic pain in managing it, in personal self-management, in appointments and visits, all the resources required to manage living with chronic pain. It's expensive, and the money has to come from somewhere. If you were to talk to a politician or a lawmaker of some kind who could invest money in chronic pain, what would you tell them?
I think I would tell them basically what I had just said to you, is that let's look at it as a country and see. I know that health is provincial, but let's look at it as a country and see what strengths we have in each province. Where are we spending money now that is successful? And so let's not duplicate that. Let's use the money wisely. And I find that researchers across Canada do work well together. I find, though, that self-help, you have a self-help group in BC, you have one in Quebec, you have one here. They're all similar, and they've spent so much money to produce that product. Why couldn't we say, everything's online, why can't I just go to the BC program? And so spend less money duplicating what we're doing. And let's see what works and try to make that more uniform across Canada. And I think speak to people who live with chronic pain. Speak to students who are learning about chronic pain. Find out what works for the students. Find out what works for the people who live with pain. Find out what works for the researchers. And let's do research on what works well and repeat that. Not the same thing, as I say, but repeat the program that's already there. Don't invest more money into it, because as provinces, we often compete with each other. Who can do it first? Who can do it better? Who can do it in English? Who can do it in French? Let's work together. As a politician, can you do that? I think when I went to the last conference, we approached the politician with, what can physios do with chronic pain? Send it to my office, she said. She wasn't interested in taking that piece of paper. She wasn't really, interested like that. But let's find out what physios can do, what occupational therapists can do, what psychologists can do, and work like that. Talk to them. I don't find they do much talking.
It's surprising because chronic pain is the leading cause of disability in so many ways, and it causes such an economic burden. I think if I remember right, it's more than the combined cost of heart disease, cardiac diseases, as well as diabetes put together.
And there's another one too, and I don't remember what it is.
I hesitate to say
yes,
cancer.
There's three.
There's three. It's like one of the largest, most expensive things to global economies, not just Canadian economy, the Canadian economy, but global economies. And we don't take the time. I'm really saddened to hear that is the case, that the politician didn't accept that feedback, because there are so many opportunities for us to collaborate, and in doing so, reduce a lot of costs and suffering associated with chronic pain.
Suffering, yes. And isn't that what we want to work on with people who live with pain, is their suffering?
Yeah.
Not even their pain per se, but their suffering from their pain.
That's a whole other component like that. that could be part 2. Because it's true. I mean, there's pain, right? If you're living with pain, it sort of becomes a natural progression, a part of the package, and then comes grief and all the other psychological components associated with living with a condition that you're going to have for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
My next question is a really idealistic one. So moving away from some of the more pain, suffering, I'd like to ask, in 150 years from now, if I was to sit down with you and talk about the state of chronic pain management and research, what do you think it'll look like?
I'd like to think 150 years from now, we avoid chronic pain, so that we have taught people who deal with acute pain what they need to look for and what they need to work on in the acute phase. And so chronic pain would be nice if it didn't exist, period. If it did exist, I think that ideally it would look like coming from the community, where people who are marginalized now would be able to go, would be able to get help in somewhere they feel comfortable, not somewhere they have to go in where there's bureaucracy and all these things that they're afraid of. And so if it does exist, that we have many places that we can go and get help. Of course, covered by whatever social is in existence at the time, because if people have to pay for it, it's going to be the same as it is now. If you can afford it, you can get help. So 150 years from now, that's the biggest change I'd like to see, is that we reach the marginalized population and we're able to make headway there. That's very different from it is now, where I still think privileged people do better, and I did find that in my research, is that people constantly said, but I was lucky, my insurance could afford it. And so when you can't afford it, my psychologist used to say, I bought her a Mercedes. It's expensive.
Yeah.
So
this is such a timely discussion, and it almost loops back to the point about what we would do if we had the opportunity to listen to a receptive politician or lawmaker about this, because one of the things that from a very Canadian context is comes to mind for me is that we have a unifying Charter of Rights and Freedoms, right? And this is like incredibly hold on, like To me, we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and one of those things that are enshrined in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is the Canada Health Act. And there are 5 main points of the Canada Health Act. 2 of them that immediately come to mind and are incredibly pressing to me as it pertains to chronic pain are equity, the ability for everyone to receive the services that they need in a healthcare space, and for accessibility. And I think that if you're a chronic pain researcher and you're not thinking about this kind of thing, you are not being practical.
I like what you say there, but I think in today's world, one of the researchers that I happen to just read up on her research to give her some points and things like that, she was working with people who were addicted, people who had issues with illicit, what is the proper word? Medication on the streets. So she was doing research on this. But how was she going to get these people to participate, to help her even formulate this research project? Because they didn't want to be associated with her. She couldn't find them.
Right. Okay.
And so, she was thinking of all these things you're saying. But how do you access these people? How do you get them to trust you? How do you even get them involved to find out what's best for them? And so I think sometimes we're thinking about it now, but we don't know how to do it. We don't know how to get people. I mean, I'm involved with places that people with lived experience are part of, we're members of. But how many of those members are people in marginalized communities? They're not, because we can't reach them to get them involved. They don't have a computer. They can't get involved. They can't get there. There's no childcare. There's no, and so I think we're thinking of it. I think we don't know how to do it. We need someone to come in and say, try this, or So at least, I don't even know, I hate to say we're thinking of it in words and not really doing it. But I would have to say that each person that I work with says, do you know how to reach marginalized communities? And no, I don't.
Yeah, and it's an important piece, because how are you supposed to be making informed decisions if you can't consult that community?
That's right. It's a big part of it. It's an important part. They have a voice. They have a voice, but they should be able to give it. And so I think that's a big issue going forward, is how do we get them involved? How can we even try? And then if we try and we get some involved, we can ask them what are the barriers and how can we overcome those barriers? But there has to be that first step where we do. And the only place I really see it happen is one of the researchers who is Indigenous, and he gets Indigenous people with pain to be involved, but it's them as a group. It's not them interspersed in other groups. Do you know what I mean? So they get a say in that particular research because they trust the researcher who also is Indigenous. So it's not really what we're looking for. We're looking for it in all research.
It's so multifaceted. The issues in this field are just incredibly layered. And we were talking before the interview about stigma. I don't know if you wanted to mention a little bit about how you think stigma plays a role in how we research and manage chronic pain.
Stigma is still a big part. Stigma is a great big part for people with work injuries. Work injuries are sort of historically been known as the fakers, the people who just don't want to go back to work. It's better than it was, but I still have a lot of people that come to me as a physio and say, my boss doesn't believe me, my colleagues are angry because I'm not pulling my weight there, they think I should be back at work. I think people who are injured on the job have a huge stigma. I certainly had stigma. I used cannabis, I took opioids, there was stigma against that. I thought when you went on the airplane, you told them you were carrying your cannabis with you because you had a medical license. Quickly, the police came and, took me to a room.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, there was a lot of stigma at that time, and I'm sure there still is. Especially now, people who take opioids, because the taboo, you shouldn't take opioids. So there's a lot of stigma there. And stigma makes us afraid to speak, afraid to voice our opinion, afraid to say, I take opioids. And so they play into this isolation, which is so prominent with chronic pain. They make you feel more isolated. So stigma, we're always worried about people, what they think about us. And who wants to not be believed? Who wants their pain not to be validated? It's so important. Stigma is an awful thing.
I think the main takeaway from all of this, we keep coming back to this theme, and I think it's really interesting that we've gone over so many topics, but the thing that we keep coming back to is that pain is so social.
Yes.
It just keeps coming up,
Yes.
but it's so true. And I mean, this could be a whole other topic, but then comes the question: how do we research how social involvement and community and connection plays a role?
But that's where we're starting to do. We're starting to look more into social. And if you look in the literature now and just put social and chronic pain, a lot will come up. So we are starting to, I think, we're starting to see that that it comes up a lot of times in people who are talking about their suffering and how they're alone and how they aren't doing well because they don't have that person to reach out to. And on the other side, you have people who are doing well and saying that this was a big part of my success. This was a big part of my success. And it always comes back to social, or 95% of the time. So I think we haven't been looking there, but it's coming. It's coming.
And I suppose, too, like, just to loop back to what you were saying about Indigenous communities being a part of research, a lot of it is also cultural in a large sense, historical. Like, we're thinking about the future because we're researchers, right? But maybe there's a lot to do with the present and the past involved in what, like, we just don't think that way as scientists. And maybe that's something for future reflection.
I like that you say the past, because now that I have 7 grandchildren, I look at how do they view pain? And I look at how it came culturally to their mom, to their dad. And so each of my 7, well, not each of them, but each family of the grandchildren, they look at pain in a different way, kind of how their parents have culturally learned about pain. And so we take that from the past, how we're going to react when we fall and scrape our knee when we're a little kid. One kid is told, get up, you're be brave. And the other kid is like, oh, poor you. So we take that from the past, but now we're looking to the future and saying, let's get little coloring books for kids on pain and teach them about pain. And so I'm looking at the grandchild who's told, oh, poor you fell. At least in school, they might learn, no, pain doesn't mean that. Pain means be careful. You might have something you need to pay attention to, but don't worry, it'll get better.
Yeah.
And I think, so we look at the past and where we were, and I think I see that a lot in children, like I say, and I really like the idea of let's teach them, because they'll formulate their attitudes and behaviors from their parents formally, in the very beginning. But if they have another view, and it shows them that this is true, pain does make my bobo get better, and it wasn't so bad, we'll go to the future. So we take what we knew in the past, culturally, historically, and we will build on it. I have great faith in us.
I have one last question, and it's just come to mind. There was a recent New York Times opinion piece that I was reading this week, and I'll share it with you, essentially talking about how with the advent of the NIH HEAL initiative, which for maybe listeners who aren't aware of this, there's a huge amount of funding behind this initiative in the United States at the moment, fairly recent. It seems we're turning a page and we're investing more money in pain research. It's a growing trend, and I want to know maybe what you think, Lesley. Do you think we're entering a golden era of pain research? Could we head towards something of a brighter future?
Be nice to think about. I haven't read that article, but certainly if the States is doing it, other people will be following, and maybe we'll start to see, like, as a healthcare professional, the person comes to you, generally is coming to you because they have pain of some sort. And so everybody wants their pain to get better. And so maybe if we put more research in many areas of pain, maybe we'll have better results, maybe we'll have better health, maybe we'll have healthier people. And so maybe we have come to that point, and that would be great. I'm interested to read the article and see. Yeah, let's be hopeful that we are.
We've gone over so many topics in this discussion, but I want to make sure there's not anything that I miss. So I'm going to leave this open. If there's something that I maybe missed or that we went over too fast, now's the time.
For me, I love this sort of thing. And so I think that this is a new way to educate. And people don't want to sit and listen to a lecture, a module, another. But I learned so much from a podcast, someone's opinion, what's out there. And so we need to do more of this. That's the topic we didn't bring up. So thank you for doing this, and encourage colleagues to do the same.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Let's Talk About Pain. Don't hesitate to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and to share the podcast with your friends. For more information, visit our website at qprn.ca or our YouTube channel by searching Quebec Pain Research Network. See you next time.